It's my honor to present to you Joseph and Monique Gonzalez to present to us the backstory, really, on the apparition of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Joseph Julian Gonzalez is a distinguished composer with over 27 years of experience in Hollywood, known for his work on award-winning films, TV shows, and stage productions. His music has been featured at prestigious venues like Carnegie Hall and the Sydney Opera House. And he has composed scores for notable projects, including the Oscar-nominated documentary Colors Straight Up and the Emmy-winning Made in L.A. Gonzalez has collaborated with artists like Slash from Guns N' Roses and conducted the Bulgarian National Radio Symphony Orchestra for the PBS documentary Children of Giant. You can learn more at josephjuliangonzalez.com. Monique Gonzalez is a classically trained vocalist who has worked as a professional cantor in major churches across Los Angeles, New York City, and Ann Arbor. She has an extensive career in music editing and score production, contributing to films and documentaries like the award-winning PBS documentary Children of Giant and singing in the Peabody Award-winning miniseries Latino Americans. Additionally, she has produced international orchestral scores and authored the libretto for the opera Sueños de Béjar. Welcome, Joseph and Monique Gonzalez.
All right, thank you for having us. My name is Joseph. This is my wife, Monique. And I'm a composer. And you might be wondering, why is a composer talking about Guadalupe and history and archaeology and anthropology? Well, it happened all by chance. It actually happened because I got a speeding ticket back in the early 1990s. I was driving through Central California on the I-5, and all of a sudden I started to hear music playing in my head. And I thought, wow, this is an interesting piece of classical music. I wonder who wrote it. And I was wondering, I was kind of going through composers in my head, and the piece sounded something like this. It went, Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison. And I thought, wow, this is interesting because this is the Kyrie from the Roman Latin Mass. And I knew that this rhythm was what they consider to be an Aztec rhythm. And I thought, wow, it's like two worlds combining together. And then suddenly I realized that, okay, this is actually being inspired as I'm speaking, and I got so excited that I started speeding, and I got a speeding ticket. I got pulled over, and I looked over for a piece of paper to write it down. But what happened is that it spurred this idea to be able to combine what happened in the time of the conquest, the combining of the Roman Catholic Mass with kind of indigenous ideas, and I decided I would follow it through and not only do it with musically, but textually. And I realized, okay, I'm going to have to get into this world called Aztec flower song poetry. Now, yes, there is a genre of indigenous Mesoamerican poetry called flower song poetry from the Aztecs. So, I started this research, and I found out that there was about 180 known song poems. And a subgenre of that are these flower song poems, and I'll explain what those are in a second. Now, they're spread across kind of 4 different manuscripts, but the largest manuscript that contains half of them is called the Cantares Mexicanos, just like Mexican Mexicanos. And the very first poem that's part of this collection, the Cantares Mexicanos, okay, is a poem called the Cuica Pecayo. Now, I know this is just so hard. I know this is really hard to follow because I'm going to be throwing out all these weird... language is Nahuatl, by the way. This is the language that Guadalupe and Juan Diego spoke. Okay, the language in which they spoke, okay? So this Cuica Pecayo, when I got into the research, I found out that it's about a singer who was looking for flowers. And why is he looking for flowers? So he can put them in his tilma, and he could go down the hill and present them to the lords and the princes. And I told myself, where have I heard this story before? This sounds a lot like the Guadalupe story. story of Juan Diego gathering the flowers in his tilma, bringing them down. And, you know, I looked at it further and I said, whoa, there are so many similarities when you look at the plot line of the Cuicapecayot, or the origin of the songs, and what is called the Nican Mopoa, which is the account that was written down of the encounter between Juan Diego. You could kind of see him right there. The singer is looking for flowers. The hummingbird shows the singer where to find the flowers. He supposedly gathers the flowers in his tilma. Then he shows it to the lords and princes. But then later on in this poem, as you're going to find out, the singer realizes that he didn't actually find the flowers. Okay? So, but as we know in the Guadalupe story, Juan Diego finds the flowers, okay? Is everybody following me? Does everybody kind of know kind of the background story of Guadalupe? Okay. So anyway, unfortunately, when I started doing research, and I said, well, what do the scholars say about this? Or what do other Catholics say about this? Because obviously there's a connection. I mean, it's pretty undeniable that there's definitely a connection between these flower song poems in general, and particular this one poem, The Origin of the Songs, or Cuicapecayot. Well, what I found out is all the academics, secular academics, said, well, obviously what's going on here is the earlier song poem is the source material for a fabricated, that is, made-up Guadalupe story. And it makes sense. I mean, there's parts in the older song poem that seems like it's, you know, using computer parlance, copied and pasted. I mean, it's so close. So now for me, this is back in the early 1990s, by the way. And I'm Mesoamerican. I'm Mesoamerican. Mexican-American. And I grew up, Guadalupe was everywhere. You know, the school I went to, my elementary school, was Our Lady of Guadalupe. I used to sing a song called Las Mañanitas, which is a serenade to Guadalupe. You know, like most Mexican Americans, I have a grandma named Guadalupe. And so this really threw me for a loop. I thought that I had found the smoking gun. I thought, this is the way the Spanish duped the indigenous. This is the way they did it. So in 2009, so this is almost 2 decades later, I meet my wife, and the piece that I was writing, which is called Misa Azteca, it went to Carnegie Hall once, and it was actually getting a repeat performance that was going to happen in 2011. So when I found out, I thought, oh, good, I want to revamp it. And Monique was working with me at the time, and I said, look at here, take this book, and I want you to try to find me some more good verses that I can put into a revamped composition. So I handed you the book in 2009, and what was your response?
Well, it was really crazy because he just hands it to me because he wanted more source material, right? I'm looking at the song poems, so of course I start at the beginning, and I've come across the exact same story, which sounds just like the Guadalupe story, which was a surprise to me because I hadn't really been into the story until a few years previously, so everything was fresh in my mind. So the moment I read it, I called to him because he just stepped out of the room. He came back in and said, what is this? Why are they saying this? You know, and that's when he started to explain about the translator at the very back of the book. He had me flip to the back, and I read the whole fabricated hoax idea, right? And at that point in time, we started this huge discussion between the two of us. We realized, you know, this is kind of important. Maybe we should turn this into a study. And that study became so obsessive, we call it our 14-year wonderful obsession, so to speak. So we went through hundreds of books, thousands of articles, literally. I mean, the bibliography that's in the back of the book is not complete. So
it's about 17 pages.
That's like 17 pages, but it's not the whole thing. But what we decided to do was to take it as far as it went, and we decided after a certain point in time that it was too much material to keep to ourselves, and that's when it turned into a book.
Right. And what part of the research is we were so surprised that nobody else was talking about this. I mean, not on the, on the Catholic devotional side, nobody had mentioned this similarity. And I don't know if it was like a hot potato and nobody wanted to touch it because nobody could explain it. But what happened after so many years, we got a different conclusion than what secular scholars were saying. And maybe perhaps it's because I'm a composer and I have to really look at text. When you set text to music, you really have to know what the text is saying. And I began to realize that, wait a minute, the earlier singer is looking for flowers but doesn't find them. That sounds like a tragic hero story. It sounds like a hero story, somebody who's wanting to find something, but it's tragic, like Oedipus Rex or any of these kind of stories from history where the hero doesn't find it. But then that always necessitates the needs for a redeeming hero or a victorious hero, somebody who's finally going to find the flowers. And of course, we know that's Juan Diego. And then you have to ask yourself, well, then what do the flowers mean anyway? And anyways, and what is this place that Juan Diego mentions at the beginning of the Guadalupe account when he says, I enter into this flower world paradise? What is he talking about? And why does he say the place that my ancestors spoke of? So he knew about this place. So Juan Diego himself, it seemed like, and we're going to get into it, kind of like left these little breadcrumbs. And we kept following them. And then finally, we said, you know what? With everything that we know, it's impossible that the Guadalupe story is a hoax. But we had to come up with an explanation, and essentially this became the thesis of our book, that these artistic expressions, such as the song poems, were the material that God embedded into cultures, into specifically the Mesoamerican culture, which would eventually find its fulfillment in the Guadalupe event. So we had to study this thing called evangelical preparation, or preparatio evangelica, which is essentially that God prepares cultures, the way he did it with the Greeks, with the Romans, with so many other pagan cultures throughout the world. God plants seeds, and then they get fulfilled. And the conversions that happen in Mexico, in Mesoamerica, is the largest Christian conversion event in the history of the world. So why would there not be preparation like it is done in so many other places? So this is where we're going tonight, and we're going to really try to boil it down because it's just so much information. But this right here kind of explains where we're going with this. Now, part 2, which is the written account of Guadalupe meeting Juan Diego, that is something that everybody knows. You know the tilma, you know the millions of conversions, but what we're saying right here is that's only part 2. There's a whole part 1 that is prophetical and provides a foundation, and we could divide that into 2 major divisions: flower world and Nahua philosophy. Okay, so is everybody with me? We good? Okay, so this is the outline. So we have to first talk about what is flower world.
Okay, so flower world, or this part 1, a good way to contextualize it, well, I can start with the Guadalupe story itself. Like Joseph mentioned, in the very beginning of the story, Juan Diego, as he's going 14 miles south to the location where he can get the sacraments, he's 14 miles, and as he's walking past Tepeyac Hill, he finds himself swept into a paradisal type realm where the rocks are radiating, he's hearing singing, he's hearing all kinds of birds, and the very first thing he says in reaction to this place is, could I be in the place my ancient ancestors spoke of, the flower world paradise in the land of heaven? But in the original account that we're going to refer back to a lot, the Nika Mopoa, which is set in the Nahuatl language, he uses his own terminology, in Xochitlalpan, in Tonacatlalpan, which is a specified term that relates to an ancient indigenous belief system in a solar paradisal realm. So the way we even know anything about this is, strangely enough, in the last 20 to 30 years, a whole bunch of scholars, and it started with the linguists, discovered that different indigenous groups from around the American Southwest, along with in Mesoamerica, within their song poetry, they were constantly relating to a place that either they called directly flower world or they had different terms for it. But all of these descriptions are the same. It's talking about a paradisal afterlife realm where everything is singing, where there's birds and there's butterflies and everything is radiating light and color. And what's interesting enough, like Joseph was mentioning, you see these exact descriptions copied and pasted in the Guadalupe account. And the way this flower world belief system worked is they think it traveled hundreds of miles, because you'll see people up in Wyoming and Idaho, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, all the way down into Guatemala, sharing all of these beliefs, and they believe that it was transmitted through the trade routes. So along with the corn that radiated out from Mesoamerica and the turquoise and the jade was also this belief system. And the way the flower world looked, or how they figured out how it looked, is it began with the Olmecs up to 3,000 years ago, something called the Middle Formative Olmec period. And this is important because they believe this flower world, or the characteristics of the flower world, began with this matrix that surrounded the corn. So what did the corn look like? It has to be in a field, it's four-sided, and you have hummingbirds and butterflies, the pollinators, to be able to allow the corn to grow, and of course lots of flowers, sunflowers, squash, it's all the color of yellow. Now this corn field, because of the glorious emanation of color and sound because of the birds and the light that was brought from the sun, they started to look at the cornfield as something called the axis mundi. I don't know if you're familiar with that term at all. But the way the axis mundi works, and it's not just for Mesoamerica, but this is how it looks here in the Americas, is it has four corners. It's the horizontal plane representing north, south, east, and west. And then there's a vertical axis coming right up through the middle of that cornfield that's going straight up to the heavens. So they saw this as the place where heavens and earth touched and met. And the way that four-graph field transmitted itself over time is it turned us a four-petaled flower. And what's really great about this four-petaled flower is that so much of Mesoamerica and a lot of the archaeological digs and anthropology shows that you see this flower everywhere. You see it in murals. You see it in small material cultures such as bowls and pots. But you also see it writ large. For instance, you see it at the archaeological ruins, a massive complex outside of Mexico City called Teotihuacan. And the way it looks like there is there are specifically two temples, the Temple of the Sun and the Temple of Quetzalcoatl, that actually have, I kind of skipped over a part here, but basically talking about the idea of the axis mundi, which has manifested itself in mountains and caves, because more often than not, throughout Mesoamerica, you'll see caves running in an east to west direction with a passageway going into the depths of the mountain, where you'll actually see the shape of a four-petaled flower. In these caves, you actually will see this at these temples, where you'll have a pathway from east to west leading to a four-petaled flower, which now scholars believe that archaeological complex is flower world writ large again, that this was their attempt to make heaven real on earth, was when the building of these temples.
Yeah, we're going over this so fast. But basically what happens is that here you have a pyramid, you have a shaft that goes from east to west, so it follows the path of the sun, and this four-petaled flower cave is actually at the center point of the pyramid. So the pyramid itself is a model of the axis mundi. It's a way in which that heaven and earth connect. I know it's just too hard to explain.
It's a lot of details,
but we'll just
bear with it.
Bear with us, okay? So the two main takeaways when we're talking about the ancient world is the idea that a flower has this transcendental connection between heaven and earth. And what is the heaven? Where do the flowers come from? They come from the flower world paradise, which is a place which is outside of our existence. Okay. We promised Professor Gondreau that we were gonna go quickly, so I'm blaming you, but no, I'm just joking. Okay, so now we got to go into our second main topic, which is Nahua philosophy. Okay, so we were talking about before about 1500 BC. Now the Nahua period starts around 600 AD. Okay, and this is when various groups that all spoke the same language, Nahuatl, came into the center part of Mexico. So all the famous groups that you've heard of, the Aztecs, known as the Mexica, they were one of these groups that came in. But there were many others. In fact, I want to tell you about the Alcoa. They were another group that came in, and they were also from a place called Texcoco. So I'm just kind of quickly giving you the lay of the land, because I think when most people think of Mesoamerica, you know, Apocalypto and, you know, Aztecs and all this stuff, it was much more subtle than that. There were many, many different groups, and they all were centered around this lake. As you could see, the Mexica, they're in Tenochtitlan, and the Texcocans in the Alcoa. Okay. And they formed a triple alliance, and we'll keep going. Tenochtitlan, this was a drawing or a painting that was made of the grand city of the Aztecs. It was on a lake, okay? Now, what most people don't know is that many of these, in fact, these groups, these Nahua groups, had music schools. And actually, it was compulsory. They were led by wise leaders called the Tlamatineme. You could say that they were really kind of the philosophers of their time. They were the teachers. They taught math and astronomy. But one of the main things that they did was memorize song poems. They didn't have a written language, but they memorized things. And they would use drawings in order to help them to remember things, okay? But these Tlamatineme, they would compose these epic, some of them were epic song poems that went on for pages. And they would talk about a great battle that occurred, or the exploits of a famous king, or also they would express their philosophy. And those are the flower songs. So they would really possess kind of like profound metaphysical ideas, and they were really, really complex. They would talk about, how do I know I'm not dreaming right now? How do we know what is real and what is not? I mean, these poems are beautiful. And they would say, you know, I sing the flowers down. You know, I'm singing flowers. The flowers, the truth, come down to heaven and I gather it. I mean, these beautiful metaphors that people have written books about. Nahua philosophy, it's a real thing. You know, people get degrees in it and write papers and books on it. But it's through flower song, okay? And these song poems were a way to be able to let everybody know what was going on. It was like the news, but it was also express their history, and as I said, it expressed their philosophy. Now, the manner in which they kind of thought about these things was through this thing called Inxochitl, which means flower, Inxochitl Inquicat, which means song, flower and song. Now, flower and song was a real active way in which people could contemplate the divine and contemplate beauty. The singer would call down the flowers from heaven, gather those flowers, and then sing flowers back up to his creator. So it was a real kind of reciprocal process. But the main thing that they centered on was about this flower world paradise. They wanted to go to this flower world paradise. And they talked about it. They said, wait a minute, you know, the Mexica or the Aztec high priests are telling me that the only way I could go to the flower world paradise is if I'm a noble, or a warrior who sheds his blood, or a sacrificial victim who sheds his blood, or a woman who dies in childbirth. Those were the categories. That was kind of like the popular way in which people thought of who could get into the flower world paradise. But when you read these songs, they're saying, wait a minute, God, what is this, am I destined for Mictlan, the underworld? They're kind of like saying, there's got to be a better way, because I want to go to this flower world paradise. I'm going off to war tomorrow, and I'm probably going to die. Is it true that through my blood, I will go to the flower world paradise? So as we talked about before, the ideas that carried over from ancient Mesoamerica turn into the flower, and the flower becomes synonymous with not only beauty, but with truth. So when the singer is wanting to find the flowers, the singer is craving the truth about the universe and this connection between beauty and ultimate beauty that resides outside of us, ultimate truth which resides outside of us. But the flower is that connection, okay? And as we said before, it connects us to the flower world paradise. Now, I won't go too much into this, but many people have written is that the Nahua had an idea of a one supreme God. Sure, they had the feathered serpent, or Quetzalcoatl, or Huitzilopochtli, Tlaloc, all these different kind of polytheistic gods. But one poet in particular, and he was Texcocan. He was not of the Aztecs. He was from another group. He came up with the concept that there must be a one supreme God. It's very close to what happened to the Greeks, where the Greeks came up with, Aristotelian metaphysics, the idea of a prime mover or first cause. They had a similar concept to this, but it was through the Texcocan line, not through the Aztecs. And they called him Intloquenahuaque, which means the God of far and near. So try to remember that name, Intloquenahuaque. Can everybody repeat it? Intloquenahuaque. Okay, remember that name. Okay, and what does Intloquenahuaque do? He makes you worthy to enter the flower world paradise. Okay, so these are the main takeaways. Okay, and now my wife Monique is going to read that poem that we've been talking about so much.
I ponder within my heart, where will I gather the holy fragrant flowers? Who will I ask? I truly desire to ask the honorable golden hummingbird, the honorable jade hummingbird. I wish to ask the trupial butterfly. Truly they know where blossom the holy fragrant flowers. I wander here through the forest of trogon birds. I truly desire to wander through the forest of roseate swans and flowers. There they may be gathered with dew glowing with sunlight. There they blossom. Perhaps I will see them there. If they showed them to me, I will fill my tilma, and with them I will greet the nobles. With them I will make the lords happy. Ah, here they live. I hear their flower song, and the mountains echo them. Ah, they are beside the flowing paradise spring of the turquoise Katinga bird. There your songs are hurled, your songs reverberate. The mockingbird echoes the jingle bell bird, and the twitter of birds is spread out, the multitude of precious songbirds. There they praise, world owner. They fill one's voice with true song. I was saying, I was yelling in sorrow. I cause you sorrow, his precious ones. And immediately they fell silent. And then comes the honorable golden hummingbird. Whom do you seek, noble singer? Immediately I respond, I say, where are the holy fragrant flowers with which I will relieve the sorrow of your beloved companions? Soon they will sing to me, truly they're here. Let's go show them to you, singer. Truly with them you will make them happy. And within the mountain, the flower world paradise, in Xochitlalpan, in Tonacatlalpan, it led me It took me to enter where the dew spread out in glittering splendor, and there I saw a multitude of precious, fragrant flowers, of precious, delicious flowers, clothed with the dew, scattered around in rainbow glory. And there they said to me, cut many flowers, whichever ones you will want, and be happy, singer. And when you arrive, you'll give them to our friends, the lords and princes, so they will give joy to the world owner. So I gathered in my tilma the various fragrant flowers, delicate scented, delicious. And I said, may some of our people enter here. May very many of us be here. And I thought, I should go forth to announce to our friends that here all of us should rejoice in the different lovely, odorous flowers, and that we should call the various sweet, holy songs with which we might rejoice our friends here on earth, and the eagle and jaguar princes in their grandeur and dignity. Indeed, I, the singer, was saying, I flower crowned the princes, I adorned them, and I filled their hands with flowers. And then I raised a pure and holy song, glorifying the nobles before the face of the God of far and near. But where would one whose worth is nothing get them? Where will one find the delicious flowers? Could one be accompanied to the flower-world paradise who is nothing, afflicted, and who offends here on earth? Indeed, it is the God of far and near who makes one worthy here on earth. And so my heart weeps as I remember going there to look about in the flower-world paradise, I, the singer, and I said, a bad place is this earth. Certainly it is elsewhere in the hereafter where there is true joy. For what good is this earth? Truly there is another life in the hereafter, and I wish to go there. I wish to sing among the multitude of precious birds. I wish to enjoy the holy flowers, the fragrant flowers, the ones that please the heart, for only their intoxicating fragrance makes one happy. Their fragrance intoxicates. Only their intoxicating fragrance makes one happy. Their fragrance intoxicates.
All right. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, there's a lot that could be told of this story, of this tale. First of all, it really fits into the category of a monomyth, and a lot has kind of been said these days about the importance of archetypes and the importance of whether a society sees itself as a victorious hero or as a failed hero. In this case, this story is a failed hero story. Joseph Campbell, of course, wrote a lot about this, the hero with 1,000 faces, by saying, really, if you look across so many different cultures, there's so many different similarities and stories that there's really only one story. And this is of a hero who sets out for something. You know, like if you think of Beowulf, or even if you think of Lord of the Rings, or any of these kind of classic stories, they all have the similar structure. You have a hero that's in the ordinary world who's called to adventure because there's something wrong. He has to set everything right. You know, think of Frodo having to go out and deal with the whole thing with the ring, and so many of these stories start out. Star Wars is the best example of this. In fact, it was modeled on this idea of the monomyth. So the other thing too, since we kind of brought up Tolkien, is that the story of Jesus Christ, the gospel, when he was speaking to one of his best friends, C.S. Lewis, he was trying to convert him to Christianity. And he knew that C.S. Lewis was a lover of mythology. In fact, that's what he had really studied and he knew best. And Tolkien one day said to Lewis, why don't you think of the Gospels as myth? think of them and look at the story behind the story in order to really understand it, which is kind of what we're asking you to do right now with this poem and how it relates to the Guadalupe event, which we're going to get to. So it really is a myth, but the difference with the Gospels is that they really did happen in history. In fact, the myth, so to speak, of the Gospels, the difference is that they are true. They are the true myth. So that's an aspect that we believe fits into the Guadalupe story. But the most important thing is that this is a story of a paradise lost. See, the singer believed he went and he found the flowers in the flower world paradise, but as you will find out, he did not find the flowers. And the reason why he couldn't find the flowers was because he was unworthy, he was sinful, and only the God of far and near, Intloquenahuaque, remember that name? Only the God of far and near could make one worthy. Now, we cross this divide with the conquest, and eventually the Franciscans show up to try to convert the indigenous. But as we're going to find out, it didn't quite work out as they hoped.
Yeah, so what happened, just a quick little history review on what's going on in 1519, 1521, Cortez came. He found a multitude of indigenous allies, approximately 200,000 indigenous allies, in comparison to just a couple of thousand Spanish that were there. The Mexica Empire fell, and in 1524, when the Spanish Franciscans came, although there were a few that weren't Spanish, they, of course, wanted to convince people of the importance of the gospel. But unfortunately, because of the language that they were using, they weren't using the terms like we've just been hearing about in Intloquenahuaque or worthiness, so naturally there was a disconnect. And you see this in their documents, but it got so bad that even though they were trying to pass on the gospel message, this true conversion of heart, the indigenous, the adults were not converting, basically. So they weren't giving up the slavery that they were practicing or the polygamy or the idol worship. Their basic idea was sort of a thanks but no thanks kind of approach. And it got so bad that just shortly before the Guadalupe apparitions occurred, the Bishop Zumanaga, the man who was on the ground, wrote to the king in Spain and saying, maybe we should just pack up and go home because nothing is working. We've come to a standstill. And the actual quote that he says is, "I consider it proper to inform your majesty of what is now taking place, for it is a matter of such great importance that we're not for divine intervention to provide an immediate remedy. This land stands on the brink of being lost forever."
Right.
So that's how it stands at that point.
So we're talking, the fall of the Mexica or Aztec Empire happens in 1521. The first groups, the Franciscans, come in 1524, and everything seems lost, okay? The missionary just doesn't seem like it's ever going to cross. And if you think about it, everything that we told you about Nahua philosophy, the way that they viewed truth through flower and song, the way that they believed the God of far and near can make you worthy, all these different ideas, even the flower world paradise in Xochitlalpan, in Tonacatlalpan, it is so seemingly far away from anything that has to do with Christianity. I mean, by the time we get to the apparitions, which happened in 1531, we see two very sophisticated cultures, the European and the Nahua, and these ideas are entrenched. I mean, people think, well, they must have been simple-minded indigenous people. They were not. I mean, as we could go into the way their society was, the way their cities were built. They were very entrenched. There was very much a sophistication. They were not pushovers, okay? In fact, they even had terms for this. I'll bring this up quickly. The word in Nahuatl for truth is Nelly, okay? And Nelly is the same word for rooted. So their concept of truth has to be rooted in their culture. In fact, they have the negative term for that, Yanquik, which means new, and it also means something that's false. You see what I'm saying? So if somebody's going to introduce to you a new religion, you're pretty much dead, okay? Because it has to be something that they already knew about. Okay, so by the time of December 9th, 1531, it just looks hopeless. Like these two worlds are never going to come together, okay? So now we're talking specifically about this version of the Guadalupe account. There are 3 other versions, but they were written in Spanish. But this one's in the Nahuatl language, and it's so fortunate that we have this because it really, you could gain so much more by studying the Nahuatl version. Okay, but we're just going to go through key points in the story to show how they bridge from indigenous ideas to Christian ideas. Okay, the first thing is that Juan Diego was going to Mass early in the morning. And as he nears Tepeyac Hill, as Monique was saying, he enters a world that sounds just like the myth of the flower world. I mean, to the T. In fact, there are actually 2 birds. They're called the trogon bird and the jingle bell bird. That's a species of birds. Both of those birds are mentioned in the early song poem and in the Guadalupe story. What are the chances? I mean, there's definitely a connection here, okay? So, as Monique was saying, the first thing he says is, am I worthy of what I hear? Now, why would he equate worthiness with this flower world paradise? Well, if you take the ending of the earlier story, it ends with the singer saying, I'm not worthy to be in the flower world paradise. So Juan Diego responds the way any commoner would. He's not a warrior. He's not of the nobility. He's in the old system. He's destined to go to the dreary underworld. He's not supposed to go to the flower world paradise. But he walks into this mythic place, and the first thing he says is, am I worthy of what I hear? And then he says, could I be in the flower world paradise, the place that my ancient ancestors spoke of? Why would he say that? Okay? So from the very, very get-go, we're seeing a connection. We're seeing a connection of ancient flower world beliefs and Christianity in this story. So this is bridge number 1. Bridge number 2 is that he meets Guadalupe, and he meets her on this hill with crags and rocks. And this is another place where the description of the flower song poems is to the T. But when she introduces herself, when she says to Juan Diego, I am the mother of the one true God, and she uses Nelly, the Nelly for true, which means also rooted. So she's actually says from the very beginning, I am the mother of a true God that you guys already know about. This is rooted in your culture. And then she goes on to give specific ways to describe God in the flower world. She uses that descriptor, but then she uses 4 more. And one of the ones that she says is, I am the mother of the God of far and near, Intloquenawake. Everybody? Intloquenawake. Okay, that name of a one supreme God, which in the earlier song poem says, the one who makes you worthy to enter the flower world paradise. So if you combine the two concepts, she's saying to Juan Diego, I am the mother of the one true God, the God of far and near, the one who makes you worthy to enter the flower world paradise. Okay, so she sends Juan Diego on his quest, and that is to build a temple at the place on Tepeyac. Okay, I'll cut more to the chase, but she sets him on his hero's journey, and he doesn't want to do it. You know, there's always that aspect of the hero's journey. It's called the refusal of the call. You know, it's when Luke Skywalker says, I can't, Obi-Wan, I just can't do this. This is too much for me. Well, Juan Diego goes through the same thing. He says, I got to go talk to this bishop. I don't even speak Spanish. I speak Nahuatl. Like, how am I going to even communicate to him? So he goes through all these obstacles, and eventually Guadalupe, the Virgin Mary says, okay, the bishop is asking for a sign. I'm cutting a lot of the story out. But she says, now you have to go and you have to give the bishop a sign because he's going to be skeptical. Of course the bishop is going to be skeptical that, the Virgin Mary is appearing on this hill on Tepeyac. So, but no miracle is specifically given, okay? But what's interesting about what the bishop does is, unbeknownst to him, he sends Juan Diego on the ancient quest, and that is to find the flowers. Everything starts to get lined up, and we skipped over so many different things for time's sake, but even the orientation that Juan Diego, that morning when he goes up the hill to find the flowers, he goes in an east to west direction. Because if you know in the story, he's on one side of the hill for the most of the time he's talking about. On the last day, he tries to sneak around her because of his uncle Bernardino. But unbeknownst to him, even that small detail lines up with ancient tradition. So he goes up the hill and he finds the flowers, okay? So Guadalupe, like the hummingbird, directs Juan Diego to the top of the hill, and he finds the miraculous tilma, the flowers. But more than that, he's not just finding flowers, he's finding truth. He's finding ultimate truth, a connection of beauty on earth, which is the divine connection to ultimate beauty, which is also beauty, truth, and goodness, which is also the truth of the universe. And he mirrors exactly what the singer, the quest, but in this case, he actually finds the flowers. He finds the flowers that the singer could not find. And the singer, kind of a representation of every man, of ancient Mesoamerican man, that has been desiring to find these flowers, because the flowers are like the key to entering the flower paradise. So Juan Diego ascends to the mountain where he finds the multitude of beautiful, fragrant flowers. He picks them and he gathers them in his tilma. He fulfills the quest. And this quest has been going on for at least 1500. Well, actually, by that point, if it's 1500 BC, 1500 AD, we're talking 3,000 years of this quest to find the flowers. And Juan Diego finds them. But let's reflect a little bit more. I mean, imagine if you're a Nahua and you've known this story all your life, this story about the singer. I mean, when you're hearing the story, you go, wait a minute, I know this story. Is this guy that we know, he's a real guy, he lives out in Cuautitlan, we know his parents, we know his family. Is this Juan Diego actually going to find the flowers? And he does. I mean, this is a big deal. So what we're talking about, and we didn't go too much into it, but prophecy, at least the way it's defined in Catholic parlance, or Archbishop Sheen says that prophecy could be a foundation of anything. It could be prefigurement, it could be typology, it could be different things, and we won't get too much into it. But Guadalupe fulfills something that was laid out, a foundation which had been laid out before. So anyway, this would have caught the attention when this story was being told. As we told you, anything that was important would have gotten replicated. It would have gone out. It would have gone out to all the different villages, hundreds, perhaps even thousands of miles away. So the myth...
It would have been in song form, so it would have been sung in a form that they understood in their own language and their own terminology, so it would have had more resonance.
So we also believe that this myth is now true myth. We talked a little bit about Tolkien, okay, and what that could mean. So the objective world, this is a quote from Jordan Peterson. The objective world, the narrative world and the objective world touch. I just love that because it's something happening within history, and it happened in this case. So of course he brings the flowers to the bishop, which in the hero story, this is what they call the return with the elixir. So it's when you have Beowulf, has to carry the head. Okay, you have to show proof somehow that you actually completed your task. And it's not only just for the bishop. It was so important that the bishop to be convinced of this, because he could have shut it down, this whole kind of devotion which started over years. He could have shut it down at any time. He didn't, because he believed it, and there was so much controversy from the very beginning. We won't even get into that. But also, we needed proof for us today. That's why we believe we have a tilma that you can see, that you can, go to the basilica and see for yourself. But it's really kind of for us today to be able to see that this miracle occurred. It's really pretty amazing. And on the tilma itself, over the womb of the Blessed Virgin Mary is a 4-petaled flower. So if we go all the way back to the axis mundi and the idea that the universe, north, south, east, and west, represents the known universe, but the vertical axis, if we set it on its side and we see that line going up to the flower world paradise, up to eternity, we could see that this is a symbol that connects heaven and earth. So when it's flipped back on its side, we're looking into eternity. Of course, we're looking into the womb. We're looking at Jesus Christ, and Jesus Christ is the flower of truth. So, but it's also the transcendentals. It's also beauty, truth, and goodness. It's also the way in which we can get to that flower world paradise, to eternity. But the main thing, which would have been the key takeaway, would have been baptism. How do you get to the flower world paradise? Well, Juan Diego was a baptized Christian, but baptism is the key. But as Monique was saying, the flower song would have spread throughout the land. Anything more to say about that?
Sure. And so as it was spreading throughout the land, while the indigenous didn't know a lot about Christianity, they rejected much about it, they did at the least know that in order to become Christian, they would need to become baptized. Because as Joseph was mentioning before, they knew that Our Lady was the mother of Ntloke Nawake. And the translation in their own terms was that if Jesus is Ntloke Nawake, and that means Jesus is the one who can open the way to the flower world paradise, they're going to do whatever it takes in order to align themselves in that respect. And so you see this massive influx of millions of people from the outer lands rushing to the closest convents. Now, a lot of people say there's forced conversions of the indigenous. That's sort of like a common thing. But you have to take into consideration what was actually happening on the ground. There was only 40 priests. There was only 7 monasteries. How could 40 priests force convert millions of people? But they do show in the accounts, and there's multiple accounts, of hundreds, thousands coming from 100 miles away, 200 miles away, 300 miles away, to the place that's closest to them in order to find a priest to be baptized. And they also understood that in order to become Christian, they couldn't be polygamous. They couldn't own slaves. They'd have to get rid of their idols. And whereas before 1531, they had all kinds of problems getting them to do that, all of a sudden, you see them giving up their slaves willingly, paying reparations for that, giving extra properties. You see them giving all kinds of money in reparation. You see them giving up their multiple wives to go back to the first wife who they had abandoned years prior to that. And they were so adamant that they were giving up their idols, they would bring the hundreds of idols that they had had hidden away from the priests, if they had encountered the priests, and going in front of them and smashing them right in front of them to prove that they were sincere about this. So this really kind of blew the priest's mind, and of course you see them speaking very openly about what is happening. Why are they coming from so far away? Especially in light of the fact that millions of people had died between 1519 and 1531 because of disease and epidemics. So everybody closest to the Spaniards, it was a very small percentage that actually survived all of that. So even get 8 to 10 million people, you had to have people coming from hundreds of miles away who've been exposed to everything that Joseph had just mentioned, the concept of the flower world, their understanding of Nawa philosophy. All these things were compiling in their own hearts and minds without any access to your European, that something massive was happening here, that they can now go to that flower world paradise that they have been craving for thousands of years to go to, that they had spent all this time writing poetry about craving the flowers. How can I get there? Do we really have to die? Do we really have to have our hearts ripped out of our chest in order to get to this flower world paradise? All of a sudden, it's made easy, and it's made easy through baptism.
So hopefully, we've filled in what most people know, which is part 2, and how a sophisticated culture, okay, that is firmly embedded for hundreds and thousands of years, was able to make that bridge over to Christianity in order to convert. So essentially with all of this, once again we said this is the largest Christian conversion event in history. Okay, the Basilica of Guadalupe is the most visited Christian pilgrimage site in the world, okay, even more than the Vatican. What was the Holy Spirit? What was God trying to do here? He was trying to make a case for belief in a Savior who erases the barrier to eternal life. In fact, it almost seems like, God went through a lot of trouble in order to convert the indigenous of Mesoamerica. So the miraculous image of the tilma serves as a reminder for us today of this incredible, miraculous event. And what does it mean for us today? It means that God is in control of history. That if God went through so much trouble to lead everybody to Him, why would He not be doing that today? That even in the darkest of times, God has a plan to bring people to Himself. So what happened even then, why would it happen even now? Monique has some more thoughts on this.
Yeah, I guess when we're talking, because Joseph and I talk about this all the time, what's the relevance of Our Lady of Guadalupe today? And I think a simple answer would be, for instance, if you talk to exorcists would tell you that they have the highest rate of people coming to them for liberation than they've ever encountered in their entire experience of them being priests and an entire period of being exorcists. And what's interesting is that many of them have also told us that once Our Lady of Guadalupe shows up, once Mary shows up, it's game over. It's done. And I think we've all encountered it. I mean, I know I have in my own personal life, and a lot of people that I know that have experiences with the occult or with paganism, because that's the way everything's built today. Like, I know that the highest rated TV shows nowadays are formed around preternatural, supernatural themes. It's really popular. It's kind of exciting to think about these different things that could be occurring. But Our Lady of Guadalupe is especially equipped in a particular way because she actually brought an entire culture of millions of people that were steeped in another way of doing things, not Christianity. And she helped to bring them, to provide bridges towards Christ, to show that actually He is the answer. He is the primary agent that can liberate people from a lot of the difficulties, both interiorly, spiritually, and exteriorly. And we're seeing that today.
Right. But everything isn't puppy dogs, puppy tails, I don't know, rainbows. It's not, the thing on the dark side, though, I just added this slide this morning just because it's something that's been happening to us so much, is there's such a dark side. In fact, whenever we just went to a conference last weekend that was sponsored by the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, and the academic world is just steeped in this idea that Guadalupe is complete fiction. And actually, I don't even want to tell you one of the conversations that I had. I can't even explain it, but an academic was telling me that the indigenous painted Guadalupe, and isn't it beautiful that they created their own divinity and a source of miracles? And I said, well, if it was painted, then isn't that anti-Guadalupe? And actually, she got mad at me. And I still can't quite understand the argument. But it just shows from what has happened is that anti-Guadalupe forces are out there. This movie on top was just released in October And as you can see by the scaffolding of Guadalupe, the whole point of the movie is to show how Guadalupe is a fiction and how it was constructed to kind of make Mexico as a nation. One of their primary sources is a book by a scholar named Edmundo O'Gorman, and it's a virulently anti-Guadalupe book. We haven't seen it, but it seems as if that's the way in which they based this movie. Even darker, there was a movie that came out in the 1990s called The Craft. It's all about witchcraft. The sequel came in 2020, and there's actually a scene where the young girls who are practicing witchcraft are in their rooms, and as you can see, there's a poster of Guadalupe on the wall. What we're trying to do is, Guadalupe has been so much brought into the occult that it's scary, and we actually think this might be what we might do. Coming from a media background, we might maybe go toe-to-toe with some of these. We need help. We are going to form a production company, and we'll give you a QR code to our website. We're also doing pilgrimages inside the Vatican. We have flyers out there if anybody's interested. One in June, September, October. We also have other things. We also have the book in Espanol, Guadalupe, La Profecía del Mundo de las Flores. We have a few copies out there. This is our QR code for our website, Guadalupe Flower World Prophecy. So we are selling signed books in the back, a sign-up sheet if you'd like to leave your email and get on our mailing list. But on behalf of my wife, Monique, thank you, especially to Professor Paul Gondreau and, of course, Providence College for having us. It has been an honor. Thank you very much. And if you want to have some questions, I suppose, we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any questions?
We welcome all questions.
Is there a feminine mother goddess in the Mesoamerican tradition?
Oh yeah, there's several. What's the name?
Guadalupe.
Guadalupe? We may be saying the wrong name, but there was.
Oh, Sihuacoatl.
Oh yes, right.
Sihuacoatl.
There was actually a female goddess that's associated with the hill at Tepeyac before Guadalupe appeared there. Now that may seem scandalous, but saints such as Elizabeth Ann Seton wouldn't have any problem with that, because it's a way that you baptize, that. But also, that argument right there that I just brought up, people have thought, well, Guadalupe obviously is a former Aztec goddess, but we call it the rebranding argument. It's kind of like going from Coke Classic to Coca-Cola or something. Why would changing the name cause such fervent, authentic Christian baptisms? I mean, there's so many different ways that you could tear down that argument. Just if you look at the historical accounts, just by renaming it from whatever that name is, I can't remember. Sihuacoatl to Guadalupe would not cause this earthquake which occurred. Hope I answered your question.
Is the basilica in Mexico City the actual place where?
Actually, the basilica is below the location where he actually gathered the flowers. It's the church at the top of the hill is where the location where it all happened.
So that is the actual location.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. What we've seen is that the scholasticism, the study of this really goes in waves. Like around the 60s, the late 60s, you see this narrative of forced conversion. And it really kept going until probably about 20 years ago. Instead of the buzzword being, coercion, it's now the buzzword is negotiation. Okay, that it couldn't have possibly have been, as you just said, it couldn't have been forced. But there's been a few books that have come out that actually have shown court records of the Nahua people, where the Nahua, the indigenous, were actually using the Spanish courts in order to gain the land that the Spanish conquistadors had taken away from them. They were actually proving that they had a lineage to nobility, to people who had owned the lands further, and they got really good at it. In fact, there's different kind of annals that are just court records. So a good friend of ours from the University of Auburn, he just put out a book that just came out about a month ago, and basically saying that the Nahua, the indigenous, had much more agency, the word, they had much more agency than they've been given credit for. So that's another thing. It'd be nice that so many of these misconceptions could get cleared up about how this happened.
Yes.
If
Absolutely. I mean, it makes you think, if you're going to make those kinds of claims, then you're obviously treating them as little kids. Yeah. So, and we've seen that. We saw that last week. And by what a lot of the scholars were saying to us is we almost wanted to challenge them and saying, if you follow your logic all the way through, you're basically saying that they don't have the ability to, rationalize through complex ideas. Yeah.
Right, and if you follow one scholar, Miguel Leon Portilla, I mean, he makes a case. He's the one who really kind of invented the whole classification of Nahua philosophy. And what he portrays that you find in many of these different codices is, as we were saying, they had music schools. They pondered deep thoughts. They wrote about them. And then if you take into account the sophistication of the way that the culture was set up, the society was set up, the way that alms or tribute was paid, the aqueducts that were made, I mean, it was a truly sophisticated culture. And what we're trying to say is, yeah, the tilma is an important part of the story. It's clearly an important part of the conversion story, but this is a very sophisticated culture. They would have had to have appealed to the philosophy. They would have had to appeal to, their deepest yearnings and deepest thinking. And that's why we say these flower song poems and the way they connect to the Guadalupe story is so important.
Hello. First and foremost, thank you for being here. I did not expect this lecture to be... I didn't know what I would expect at a lecture, but this took a very interesting route. It was very fun to follow. Speaking of the Nahua philosophy, excuse me if I mispronounced it.
Nahua.
The title God of Far and Near sounds very providential. I didn't know if you could expand more on that or if there was like hints of that in their philosophy.
Sure.
It's interesting. There's actually 4 different terminology that we go into our book that kind of lend towards a supreme principle. One of them is Epaunamwani, giver of life. Another one is Toko Koyani, or the one who is not made, the one who exists in and of itself. So all of these terms, it's interesting when you get into Miguel Leon Portilla, and he's breaking it down, the whole concept of the God of far and near. It's talking about all that is within your immediate reach. It's definitely, what's the word? I'm blanking on it, but thank you. Transcendent and immanent would be a good way of explaining it, absolutely, because there's no boundaries to this God. And it was understood by the first priests that this was a potential way of being able to reach into the culture because they saw its equations to even like our own creed. You see the equivalence of it. But unfortunately, they didn't know how to use it. They didn't know the context in which to use it. But when Our Lady used it, she used it in the context of its origination, which is flower world. It's directly related to flower world. So when she says it, it's able to click into the indigenous mind. I don't know if
Right, and just there was a priest who gave a homily on December 12th. I wish I could remember where it was, but he connected the concept of God afar and near to Paul's unknown God of Mars Hill. That there was an idea of an omnipresent, or a God who is both far and which is what it means. I'm sure Professor here could explain it, that there's deep theological underpinnings to a God that is omnipresent, who's both close to you and both far away. And they had a concept of it. We actually break it down, the Nahuatl, Intloque Nahuake. Nahuake means in the circuit of. And it has a much deeper, but it's through you, it's in you, it's in everything, it's the entire universe. And they had that concept, and Guadalupe actually uses that term, that concept. Of course, it's also in the earlier flower song poems as the one who makes you worthy to enter the flower world paradise. So hopefully we answered your question.
Can you describe a little more their view of heaven, or is it, say, an earthly paradise, or what? When, this heaven that they believed in and spoke of.
They very clearly considered it another dimension, absolutely, that they could only arrive at through death. But not everybody was allowed, so to speak, to go to this place. Only warriors could go, those who shed their blood, right? Or women who died in childbirth. So they definitely sequestered it for a very small group of people. Everybody else would go to a place called Mishlan, which was this, nefarious netherworld where it was fire and everything you would normally allocate to hell, or what you would think of as hell. And they considered most of the population would go there. So when, it's interesting, I don't know if we brought this up, but when you describe Juan Diego, he's described as something called a masahual. And that term, masahual, is very specific to the concept of worthiness. So they basically considered a commoner who couldn't go to Mishlan an unworthy one, and so
Who couldn't go to flower world.
couldn't go to flower world paradise. Sorry, and so just the very nature of that they're actually making a whole caste system or classification of people in a socio-economic way was directly related to whether or not they could go to this flower world, which was this place that it's the best that that humanity can give times 100, and they understood it that way because everything in that space is irradiating light. They don't know the source of the light, but it's coming from somewhere, and everything's singing. The flowers are singing, the earth is singing. So it's not this location. They never understood it in that way.
Well, it seemed like they had when they talked about things that were holy, it's so curious in the flower songs. They talked about it being a place. So it was a place that you could go to, or you could get a glimpse of through flower and song, okay, of this other divine place, or through the arts, even through dancing or painting or things like that. It was through beauty. But so many times it was so synonymous with the word, the phrase in Xochitlalpan. Xochitl means the flower place. Tonacatlalpan means the place of heat and energy. So Tonatiuh means sun, the sun. But it also is a place of sustenance, a place of creativity. So if you put those two phrases together, it's the flower world paradise, the place of ultimate beauty, plus the place of ultimate energy, creativity, all this other place. But it really kind of signifies like the place of ultimate truth. And anyway, the Franciscans eventually kind of caught on that this is their idea of heaven, and they start using the term Xochitlalpan, the flower place, or they use the entire phrase sometimes in order to say this is heaven. They actually equated it with heaven because and you have to do that with language. For example, how do you say, the Eucharist is bread if a culture doesn't have a concept of bread? But they do have a concept of tortilla, right? So actually, when you see early writings, they would. I know it sounds a little scandalous, but they would say the Eucharist was a tortilla because they didn't have bread. So they had to kind of come up with the nearest, thing that was closest to, and that's what you have to do with languages.
The people that were questioning you on the validity of it, did they realize all the specifics, the testing that have been done today? Like the
Disregarded.
They disregard
the
everything.
painting isn't even touching the surface of the tilma. And
You don't even get to that point in the conversation with them.
I mean, there's so much stuff today that it can't be denied.
No, it,
Unfortunately, they disregard
no.
all of it.
Actually, one scholar, it was really strange. He's actually a fellow at the Getty, which is a great position. He wrote a book called Flower Worlds. So he's kind of like one of the main proponents of this whole flower world concept idea. And we got in a conversation with him, and we were trying to make the connection between the Guadalupe story and these flower song poems and the whole flower world concept. And he just wouldn't go there. And finally, he just said, well, I got to tell you, I just have a problem with the thesis of your book that the indigenous were to be converted to Christianity, that was their end goal. And in the end, he said, he goes, I know who you guys are. And we go, after we'd been talking to him for like 15 minutes. And he goes, and then we go, well, we'll give you a copy of our book. He goes, I got a copy of your book on my desk right now. And so we thought, whoa, I think we have a target on our back. So, but they totally disregard it.
Now, if you're doing this production thing, are you going to bring up a lot of those details? Because a lot of people don't know it. We recently had the painting, one of the painting duplicates, at our church, and I knew a lot of stuff before. And then they had a pamphlet, and I've learned even more. And then I bought the book. There was another book, and I've learned so much more. I mean, a lot of people don't even know all the details that are involved in that.
Yeah.
The heartbeat and the temperature where the womb is, and all in the face, what you can see in the eyes on the painting. There's so much that, are you going to bring a lot of that stuff out?
Well, there's so many other books that focus in on the tilma. We don't want to just bring up, things that have been brought up already. So, that was part of our research. As far as we know, and we've been looking at it, we don't know of anybody else who's comparing the Guadalupe story to the flower song poems. So you're hearing it here first.
Yeah. And
I think sorry.
Sorry. I was just going to say, part of why we were doing this is because there's so many issues that people will attack on the tilma. We thought it was kind of nice to approach it from this angle because it provides more of a rational argument, more of a natural theological argument that the average person can kind of follow through and piece together, which was much more easier for us because we had our own doubts, with certain aspects. But this kind of takes it from the other direction, where you can pick it apart and look at the history and look at the linguistics and look at the anthropology and go, oh, okay, this makes sense.
I think we have time for one more question. In the back.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. I suppose I'm asking for a clarification more than anything else, but Hinduism is, I guess for context, Hinduism is primarily regarded as a polytheistic religion, but often, or I guess primarily, it is monotheistic, as there's one supreme God, but the other deities are expressions of that God. And I was just wondering if there was a similar relationship between the God far and near and gods like the fire serpent God, or like, are they connected in that way, or are they coming from different cultures?
Oh, yeah, that's actually an interesting point. There's a concept in at least the Mexica world called Ometeotl, which means literally dual God or two God. And this concept kind of came later. You have the polytheistic gods, like a corn god or a rain god or this or that. But then there came a concept of Ometeotl, which basically was a dual god. Okay, light and dark, life, death, et cetera, who became the god of all the polytheistic gods, okay? And unfortunately, many times the god of fire near is assigned to Ometeotl. And you kind of have to make distinctions, and actually there's you're kind of getting into like a lot of insider baseball. But the thing about it is that many people make that mistake that Guadalupe herself was referring to in Tlocanahuaque, the god of fire and air, to refer to a dualistic god over this concept of a pantheism or polytheist, group of gods. But the thing about it is that, there's many different ways you can refute that. Number one, the story is told obviously in a Christian context, so it wouldn't be referring to a dualistic god. And also there was a concept to be able to use that same name in terms of one supreme God, which many people have agreed to, that it also does refer to that. So believe me, that what you just brought up right now is really, really tight, because even when we went to the Basilica and talked to the foremost expert in Guadalupe and that concept of the dualistic god of Ometeot, he thought that we were referring to that. And he actually started kind of like chastising us, like, what are you doing here? And we knew what he was talking about, and we said, no, we are not referring to Ometeot as the dualistic god. We're using in Tlocanahuaque as a one supreme God, which eventually bridged over to the Christian God. So, yeah, I know what you're talking about, because it gets into Manichaeism kind of ideas, where you have dualistic ideas, and then Neoplatonism, where you have like the one. It's kind of similar to that, what happened with the Nawa. It can get pretty deep. But rest assured, it's a one supreme God. It's not a dualistic God.
Wow, super fascinating and rich. Please join me in thanking Joseph and Monique Gonzalez.
We'll be out in the front signing books if anybody.
Anybody's interested in asking more questions, we can take them one-on-one.